What's up YouTube, Capital G here, checking out the brand new Tianwei Dragon archetype that just got revealed. These guys are going to premiere in Rising Rampage, and oh my goodness, this archetype looks spicy as hell. So far guys, Rising Rampage looks like an incredibly awesome set. The Marin Sass and these Tianwei Dragons both look magnificent. This archetype reminds me of a little bit like, it's like a cross between Yang Zing and Metaphos. Yang Zing because of the artwork and the fact that the entire archetype is worm base, and then it's kind of like Metaphors because you are running normal monsters, or you're putting normal monsters on the field, and this deck kind of revolves around normal monsters being empowered by the regular effect monsters that you're going to use. So it's a very interesting dynamic, but the support cards for this archetype are incredible, and my first kind of thoughts and intuition are telling me this deck is going to be competitive, especially when you get to the spells and traps. So I believe we got about 10 cards or so to break down. Let's go ahead and start with the first one. This is Tianwei Dragon Adhara, and it's a level 1 Earthworm tuner monster, and the fact that it's a tuner makes me think that maybe they're leaving the door open for a synchro down the line with this archetype. It has 0 defense and 0 attack. The first and second are both hard once per turn, and the first effect of this guy is built into every single monster in the archetype, well, all the main deck monsters. It's if you control no effect monsters, you can special summon this card from your hand. So essentially every single monster in the archetype, like the main deck cards, they can all just special summon themselves before you use your normal summon. Now the second effect says if you control a non-effect monster, you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard, then target one of your banished worm monsters except this card, add it to your hand. So the way that the archetype works is all of them have effects that banish them to essentially give you like utility effects, but they generally only work on normal monsters, and the links are actually normal monsters, or at least a couple of them are. So yeah, this seems like a pretty good card. Basically it's just kind of like a recursion or a resource management type card. I think that you know, those cards are always going to be good in Yu-Gi-Oh! The next one is the Water one, and their attribute pool is all over the place, very similar to Yang Zing. That's why I say they remind me of that archetype a lot. This is Tianwei Dragon State Hana. I'm sorry, I know I'm butchering these names, but just work with me here. It's a level 4 Waterworm monster, 400 attack and 2000 defense. The first effect is just a special summon if you don't have any effect monsters. Again, it's on all of them. The second effect is if you control a normal monster, or excuse me, if a normal monster you control is destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard, then target one of those destroyed monsters, special summon it, then you can destroy one monster your opponent controls. This effect is absolutely amazing. So basically, if your opponent destroys any of your normal monsters, you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard, and then you get to blow up a monster on your opponent's side of the field, and it's also non-targeting. And it's obviously a quick effect because it could activate if your opponent, for instance, just runs your monster over by battle. This seems like a really, really good card, and the fact that it activates from the graveyard seems incredibly solid because the normal link monsters in this archetype are not like super powerful, so you need ways of kind of protecting them. The next one is Tianwei Dragon Manira. That one wasn't hard to pronounce. Level 4 Fireworm monster, 600 attack, 1500 defense. The second effect is when your opponent activates a card or effect that targets a normal monster you control. Quick effect, you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Okay, so this is basically your outs to things like Widowmaker and Impermanence, and you know, just the other kind of annoying targeting cards that are in Yu-Gi-Oh! There's a lot of targeting going on right now, and I think that this is a pretty good card. I don't think that you'll play as many copies of this one as you would the other ones. This might be like a one of or something like that, but it's definitely a card that you're going to run because having targeting protection is awesome in Yu-Gi-Oh! The next card is your Tianwei Dragon Nahata. This is a level 4 Windworm monster, 800 attack, 1000 defense. If you notice, you're never really going to keep these monsters on the field. You're almost always going to link summon because none of their stat lines are really overly impressive. Like, we haven't even gotten a monster that has like 1800 attack yet, so you're not going to be sitting on these guys very long. The second effect is when an attack is declared involving a normal monster and your opponent's face-up monster, you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard. That opponent's monster loses 1500 attack until the end of the turn. Alright, so this is essentially your battle trap, if you will, of the archetype, your honest slash collude slash battle phase trick type card. Again, it seems like a really good card. Also, it can be used during both players' turns, so it can be when you attack one of your opponent's monsters or when they attack you. This actually reminds me of like what Boo Bujins used to do with like Bujin, I think it's Senryu. It's a card that can activate from the graveyard and your opponent really can't do anything. It also doesn't target. It feels like just another card to keep your normal monsters protected. And I'm really liking the fact that all of these dudes can activate from the hand or the graveyard. You get dual utility out of them, especially if you're using them from the graveyard. Now when it comes to their biggest main deck monster, this is Tianwei Dragon Vishuddha, Vishuddha. This is a level 7 Dark Worm. It is 1500 attack and 2500 defense. The first effect is just the same. You can just special summon it from your hand if you control no effect monsters. The second effect is the removal effect for this archetype. If you control a normal monster, you can banish this card from your hand or graveyard, then target one card your opponent controls, return it to the hand. So this is essentially your evac device. It's a way of being able to out extra monster or monster summon from the extra deck instantly. Would have been really nice if you would have been able to use this as a quick effect, but keep in mind that this does not just work on monsters. This works on any card your opponent controls. So it's actually better than evac device because you can use it on spells and traps. It doesn't matter if they're face up, face down, whatever. You can basically hit any card. It does target, unfortunately, but this does feel like an incredibly solid card. And when it comes to these main deck monsters, their levels really don't matter all that much. I just love the fact that like you can special summon any of them. So as long as you have like a couple of monsters, you basically can start playmaking instantly. Let's go ahead and start checking out the link monsters. There are 3 links in this archetype. The first one is Tianwei Barefisted Monk, and this is a link 1. It's an earth worm monster. Its link points down towards you. It has 1000 attack and it requires a non-link Tianwei monster. Okay, so this is your first normal monster in the archetype. And I was kind of wondering when I read these cards, I was like, are you supposed to just play other like vanilla monsters, like Sabersaurus or something like that? I was wondering if this archetype was going to have vanillas itself, and the vanilla monsters are actually the links. It's nice that this deck has a link 1 because essentially you can just special summon any of your Tianwei dragons of their own effect before you normal, and then you can go straight into your Barefisted Monk, and boom, you now have a normal monster on field. It only has 1000 attack, but keep in mind it's a link 1, and I think the playstyle of this deck might be similar to Bujin's, like 1 or 2 monsters on the field, Sky Strikers, and basically just keep that monster protected. Now the link 2 is actually quite different because the link 2 is an effect monster, which kind of threw me for a loop. The link 2 is Tianwei Dragon Sage. This is a Fireworm monster. It is linked to, and it has kind of the standard link to link points, which are bottom left and bottom right. It requires 2 worm monsters to summon, so I guess even decks like True Kings and Yang Zing can technically summon this. It says the first and second effects are both hard once per turn. The first effect is you can discard 1 card, then target 1 worm monster in your graveyard, special summon it, but for the rest of the turn, you cannot activate the effects of monsters special summoned from the extra deck other than Tianwei monsters while they are on the field. So if you do play this in another worm deck like Metafist or Yang Zing, it basically is like a Lumina or a Zombie Master for the archetype, but you are kind of locked in if you're going into your extra deck into Tianwei monsters, which in this deck is not going to be a problem. The second effect is actually quite incredible. The second effect says, when an attack is declared involving your normal monster, you can target 1 card your opponent controls and destroy it. So the way that I'm looking at this deck is basically, I'm thinking that if you open with a couple of Tianwei dragons, right, you would probably special summon one of them and then normal summon the other. You'll go into your link 1, then you'll go into your link 2 using both monsters, and then you'll activate the link 2, the Sage's effect. You'll pull back your link 1, and now you have the link 2 on field, and you also have your link 1, so you have your normal monster to protect. And basically, if you're going second, as long as you attack into anything, you can just blow up your opponent's card. Even if their monster is bigger, you can just attack and then activate this effect, blow their monster up, and then maybe just attack directly. So this seems like a really good card. Now the interesting thing is, there's a link 3 in this deck, and after you go to link 3, it becomes a normal monster again. So very kind of crazy how they how you kind of link up in this deck, where the link 1 is normal, the link 2 is basically like a Lumina, and then the link 3 actually becomes normal again. I think you'll summon the link 3 some of the time, but not all the time. The link 3 is Tianwei Ashura. This is a link 3. It's a dark worm monster. Looks like its link points are pointing up towards your opponent, bottom right, and then top right, which is interesting. I'm not sure if we have another link with those specific points. It requires 2 monsters or 2+ monsters, including a link monster. So I'm not sure that you'll go into this guy all that often. It definitely does not feel like a turn 1 play. because it is that vanilla monster, but it definitely seems like if you can get them on board, it should be fairly hard to kill. And that's because the spells and traps in this archetype are absolutely just marvelous. Like, let's look at these spells and traps. They're ridiculous, especially this freaking field spell. The field spell is called Land of the Eternal Tianwei. It's a field spell that first effect says normal monsters on the field are unaffected by monster effects. That's what I'm talking about. So basically, if either one of your Tianwei monsters is either one of your Tianwei links are on the field, the normals, basically your opponent's not getting any type of monster effects on them. And then the second effect is just nuts. The second effect says once per turn, if your opponent special summons an effect monster or monsters while you control a normal monster, you can draw 2 cards. Holy moly. And keep in mind that some of these Tianwei dragons activate as quick effects from the hand. So basically, even if you're drawing these monsters, they can be essentially live, acting as hand traps. So I'm loving the way that this archetype can just produce advantage so easily from its field spell. The next spell is actually a Rota and a Foolish Burial built into one card. It's called the Hollow Cycle of Dragons. It's a hard once per turn on its name, and it says send 1 worm monster from your deck to the graveyard. Then if you control a normal monster, you can add 1 Tianwei monster from your deck to your hand with a different name than the sent monster in the graveyard. So basically, this is kind of crazy. I would imagine that you just want to go into the link 1 and then activate this card immediately. You can send maybe the Earth one, the level 1 tuner to the graveyard, maybe even activate that guy's effect if you have a banished monster. I mean, how can you be mad when you're basically getting a Rota and a Foolish Burial built into one card? That just seems kind of crazy. Like, Mayakashi has something that's very similar to that. And then lastly, guys, because you know Konami wanted to make this deck good, they gave it an Infernnity Barrier, which I'm just going to officially say this makes this deck competitive. I've said it before, any Yu-Gi-Oh deck that gets an Infernnity Barrier is automatically by default a competitive deck. As Orcus, as Salamangreats. Yes, this archetype has an Infernnity Barrier, which automatically makes me want to play it. This is called Supreme Tianwei Style Fist. It's a counter trap, and it says when a monster effect or spell / trap is activated while you control a normal monster, negate that activation. Okay, and then the second effect says if this set card is destroyed by an opponent's effect, special summon 1 non-effect or normal monster from your extra deck. So this is actually crazy. Even if this card isn't live and your opponent destroys it on the field, you basically get to summon one of your link monsters for free, including a 3000 attack link 3. Like, that is absolutely crazy. Now, this doesn't actually destroy the card, so it's not as powerful as some of the other Infernnity Barriers. However, if you do use it against a hand trap, if you use it against a regular spell or a regular trap or a counter trap, those cards are just going to basically fizzle out. You're not gonna have to worry about those. But if you use it on a monster that has an effect when like summoned, for instance, like Salamangreat Foxy, I mean, you can negate it, but you won't actually destroy it. So it's not quite as powerful, but it basically feels like another kind of power creeped Infernnity Barrier, where you're getting an Infernnity Barrier, but then you're also getting a bonus effect. So let me know what you guys think of the Tianwei Dragons so far. I think that this archetype looks pretty damn amazing. Their spells and traps are all incredibly powerful, and I kind of like this whole you have to play normal monsters, but you have so many ways to power them up. Anyways, whatever you guys think, leave it in the comment section below. Thank you guys for watching. As always, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on that notification bell for daily videos.